But the bow.
Steiner. Steiner couldn't muster enough strength for an attack.
Steiner's attack didn't happen.
Giving STIGLIIs VLPF. Who says that the soldiers are my friends and my friends are everyone? They even defeated the USS. Generosity is that there are no more soldiers. Who are the soldiers, sir? I cannot accept that the soldiers are for you. Soldiers are soldiers and soldiers.
Let me ask you, how many historical figures? And by historical, let's try to narrow the scope simply to contemporary history. In your opinion, how many of them have powerfully impacted the collective imagination through cinema? I know it's a very complex question, and maybe you would need a few minutes before giving your answer. I'll give you my answer. And it's today's character, Felix Steiner. Does this name mean anything to you? Well, if you've seen that movie from about 20 years ago, Downfall, maybe it does. Steiner is that general who finally makes Hitler lose his temper. He really did. Then the story was recalled in that movie in a way that it must be said was masterful. The Führer's outburst, the last powerful one, was precisely due to Felix Steiner's refusal to obey an absurd order, impossible to carry out. That scene has entered the collective imagination. It has become a source of constant memes on the internet. Come on, let's admit it. How many of you have watched that clip over and over again? Each time with a different element? We also did it here at Dentro L'Storia to celebrate reaching 100,000 subscribers, since it's such a strong base. But who really was Felix Steiner? Who was this character capable of getting on Hitler's nerves? Was he a fervent Nazi? Was he a general reluctant to obey orders? Or was he simply a pragmatic soldier? Or maybe he was an extremely dangerous character. Before that outburst, before that April 22, 1945, the day that entered the collective imagination. Who was Felix Steiner? To understand that, we need to go back in time. Born in Staloponin in East Prussia during the German Empire, it was May 23, 1896. Steiner had fought during the Great War as an infantry cadet. He had also received awards such as the Iron Cross First and Second Class. After the war, he found himself in a Freikorps, one of those unofficial military units created to brutally suppress popular uprisings and especially socialist aspirations. While other Freikorps operated in Bavaria, Silesia, Berlin, and Mecklenburg, Steiner found himself in Memel, present-day Klaipėda, in Lithuania. There, his Freikorps had struck hard. Then, Steiner himself preferred to return to the official ranks of the army in the Reichswehr, and from 1921 to 1933, he served as an infantry officer, eventually leaving with the rank of major. 1933 is a turning point for Steiner and for all of Germany. It is the year when the National Socialist Party comes to power and gains the opportunity to lead the government. And that revolution, a real revolution within the German Reich, changes everything. It also changes Steiner's life. Subtitles Revolution. And then the Sturmabteilung, but the Sturmabteilung, as we know, are the losing side of the National Socialist Revolution. It's the activist side, the side of Herzl Röhm, destined to be swept away. On the night of the Long Knives, Steiner is one of the many Sturmabteilung followers who change sides during the night of the Long Knives. He is one of the many who prefer to swear loyalty to Hitler and join the SS. It's 1935. Steiner begins his career, a career that is not exactly made up of regular troops. Initially, thanks to his military background, Steiner is chosen for the SS training school. In fact, he is sent to command a training battalion. The Verfügungstruppe is the core of the future Waffen-SS. From here, a new career begins, the promotion to colonel, Standartenführer, the command of a guard regiment, the Deutschland. And it is precisely as the head of the Deutschland that Steiner finds himself involved in the Second World War. His is one of the two SS units, the future Waffen-SS, to take part in the Poland campaign. Then in France, here he proves that Himmler's dream can actually come true, that of shaping the SS not just as an internal police force for Germany, but as a true Praetorian army. On August 15, 1940, Felix Steiner receives the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, and he is officially introduced to Heinrich Himmler, the Reichsfuhrer of the SS, who gives him a new assignment, that of creating one of the first armored divisions of the Waffen-SS that are being formed, but a very special division. It is not made up of Germans, despite the strongly racist theories of the Nazi Reich. There is a possibility to recruit foreign personnel, the so-called Volksdeutsche, that is, those foreigners who have a percentage of German blood or German characteristics, within the SS Panzer Division Peking. In fact, apart from the officers who are all German, the troops are made up of Dutch, Flemish, Finnish, Danish, and a few Norwegians. That's where the name Viking comes from. It's the first concrete experiment of collaboration by citizens of other invaded states or those cooperating with Nazi Germany. Within the German armed forces, Steiner actively participates in the formation of the Viking Panzer Division, in its training, and leads it into battle during Operation Barbarossa, the assault on the Soviet Union. The Viking is known for both its combative nature and its atrocities. In Ukraine, the Viking massacres 600 Jewish citizens rounded up for the occasion. It acts like any Einsatzgruppe, and it's one of the many massacres that the Waffen-SS will commit throughout their history. After a long period in the East, the Viking is moved to other positions. Steiner is removed from command, so why was he promoted? He is given the task of commanding the 3rd Panzer Corps. It's an assignment he receives in April 1943, and it involves an anti-partisan operation. His experience in Ukraine works in his favor. He is the one who can bring his background in repression to the command of military units. Repression where? This time, in Yugoslavia, fascist Italy is still not out of the war, but in the occupied Yugoslav territory, partisan activity is very strong. There are two main groups, the one led by Josip Broz Tito and the Chetniks of General Mihailovich, monarchists who will later side with the Germans. This is where Steiner brings his experience. He instructs in anti-partisan warfare. But he doesn't stay in the Balkans for long. In the winter of 1943, his corps is transferred again to the Eastern Front, this time to the north, at Leningrad, a critical area. The siege of Leningrad occupies the German armed forces for almost 3 years. It's a terrible siege. The inhabitants of Leningrad have to come up with any way possible to survive. In some cases, they even try to make flour for bread from sawdust or wallpaper. But Leningrad survives in any way. Leningrad does not give up. So here Steiner finds himself directly involved. Leading his troops in the final phase of the siege during the Battle of Narva, he himself leads his troops. But they begin to feel the weight of an unsustainable war. Even the Battle of the Tannenberg Line, which followed the one at Narva, saw Steiner's troops pushed to the limit and eventually forced to retreat on the Courland Peninsula. From that peninsula, the entire 3rd Panzer Corps of the Waffen-SS was transferred by ship to Germany. These troops are too valuable to remain in the area. Victim of the Soviet advance, Hitler has a special plan for Steiner and his men. They will have to take part in the defense of Berlin. A new large unit is created, the 11th SS Panzer Army, a unit that exists only on paper. Within it, the 3rd Panzer Corps of the Waffen-SS is included, which is then later reassigned as a reserve for the 3rd Army. Steiner is given a new task, that of countering the Soviets, who are now pressing more and more on the German borders. During the battle on the Seelow Heights, Steiner sees the last reserves of his Panzer Corps burn. His men are exhausted, the units are down to the bare minimum, resources are gone, the tanks are destroyed one after another, ammunition is running low, there's little to be done. not much to save except their own lives. When on April 21, 1945, Marshal Zhukov breaks through the German lines on the Silo Heights, Steiner is already in retreat, but Hitler doesn't know it. Or rather, he suspects it, but he pretends not to. In fact, he is convinced that this unit, which exists only on paper, the 11th Panzer Army of the Waffen-SS, can intervene. Or at least that Steiner can form from this a Kampfgruppe, a battle group that can intervene directly. Hitler himself sends a message to Steiner telling him to take command of a detachment, the so-called Army Abteilung Steiner, and to intervene immediately. In defense of Berlin, the Russians must not enter the capital of the Reich. When Steiner receives the order, he is surprised. He begins to wonder whether Hitler actually knows the real situation of his men or not. Why? Because Berlin is indefensible, at least not by Steiner's troops. He basically has 3 divisions at his disposal. The 4th Police Division, which has been converted into an Armored Grenadier Division, and the 5th Mortar Hunter Division, and the 25th Panzer Grenadier. But of all these, stationed north of the Finau Canal, none can really go into action. The police division is walking. The Jaeger division almost doesn't exist anymore, and of the 25th Panzer Grenadier, only 2 battalions are available to take over the positions of the police and the Jaeger. A coastal division is supposed to arrive, the 2nd, but it's still on the march. So those 2 exhausted units can't move, and moving from there is only possible with the 2 battalions of the Panzer Grenadier Division. That's madness. So Steiner refuses and stays put? He calls his superior, General Heinrich, to communicate the decision. They can't move. It's impossible to comply with that order. Heinrich calls his superior, Hans Krebs, Chief of Staff. It's unfeasible. He is told that Hitler is too busy and can't answer that call. And then an order is an order, and it must simply be carried out. On April 22, 1945, Hitler, in his Führer bunker, holds the usual meeting, the map on the table, pencils in hand, to draw the positions. He asks his generals for reports on the attack launched by Steiner. He is convinced that Steiner has followed his orders, and that he has gone on the attack against Zhukov's armies. When Krebs and the other generals reply that Steiner has not attacked, that he has remained where he was, Hitler explodes with rage, making the walls shake, even in the other rooms. He is clearly heard by Brigadier Führer Bunker, one of his most loyal men. He tries to comfort the secretaries who are crying. Hearing those angry screams, Hitler declares to everyone that the war is over, that there is nothing more to be done. He intends to stay in the bunker and kill himself so as not to be captured alive by the Soviets. Steiner, in fact, tries to do something. When the first reinforcements from the Coastal Division arrive, he gladly entrusts them to Rudolf Höst. Those few mobile units that can still do something, that can still march south to fight in Berlin. With him, there should be 2 other generals, Wenck and Busse, for a pincer action. Busse from the south and Wenck in the center, coming from the west, from Poznan. But those attacks carried out by tired, worn-out troops, now incapable of real offensive actions, end up achieving nothing. April 25, 1945, marks the definitive end of the last German efforts to keep the Red Army away from Berlin. Hitler will commit suicide. A few days later, Felix Steiner dismisses his men and is arrested by the Allies. He spends over 2 years in prison. Steiner, the Waffen-SS uniform, is already considered in itself as a symbol of a war crime. He is brought to the defendant's stand at the Nuremberg trials. But the accusations are not supported by evidence. The accusations regarding the atrocities in Ukraine and Yugoslavia. Why don't the Soviets cooperate at first? So there's something more. But Steiner gets a second life. He keeps his name. He keeps the right to a pension due to his rank. But he has the chance to collaborate with the Americans, who are intent on rearming Germany. West Germany must become the bastion in Central Europe of the NATO defense system. Felix Steiner is one of the military advisors involved in a new association, the Gesellschaft für Verteidigungskunde, the Society for Defense Studies. Steiner and other former Nazi generals are working to structure the future Bundeswehr. The Army of the Federal Republic of Germany helped found the new German Army. But that's not all. Steiner also co-founded another association we've mentioned, the Black Lobby, the lobby of former Nazis, which puts pressure on German society from the mid-1950s onwards to change the perception that the German public has of former Nazis. Other SS bigwigs like Paul Hauser, Herbert Gill, Otto Kumm, together with Steiner, they promote the OCHIAG meetings, carry on the publications, organize the meetings. The OCHIAG, as we've already seen, is gaining more and more ground. But Steiner eventually adopts some critical positions. He doesn't like, for example, the statements of the former paratrooper general Theodor Ramke. He's too extreme. Even Steiner, who eventually quits the OCHIAG meetings in disgust and isolates himself at home. He writes several memoirs. For example, he writes one about his experience leading the Viking Panzer Division. He titles it Die Freiwilligen der Waffen-SS-Idee und Opfergang, meaning the volunteers of the Waffen-SS idea and sacrifice. His memoirs are described as something far beyond the historical scope and bordering on pure apologetics. But it should be noted that he also writes another book. It has a decent amount of sales, maybe because the German public is interested in knowing Steiner's opinion or simply because war books always sell well. Steiner died on May 12, 1966, just a few days before turning 70. He leaves behind the memory of an officer of the Waffen-SS, organized, capable, clear-headed even in times of crisis. But who was even able to say no to Hitler? Hitler, who had embraced the idea of the Waffen-SS, who was enthusiastic about creating a Praetorian Guard loyal to him, even superior to the Wehrmacht. Almost rehabilitating Röhm's idea, who wanted to transform the Sturmabteilung into the regular German army. But Steiner had a critical conscience that many other Waffen-SS officers did not have. He had understood the limits of Hitler's madness and did not want to follow him. He didn't plan to embrace it or sacrifice himself and his men. Steiner did not want any part of this madness, the madness of total destruction, of Europe's greatest fire, of the Götterdämmerung, the twilight of the gods, as Wagner called it, whom Hitler greatly admired. And at the cost of a memorable outburst, which he was not present for anyway, he said no. What remains in all our memories are those images from that film that's now more than 20 years old. Steiner's name, shouted repeatedly by a furious Hitler, forced for the first time to face the reality of the facts with his back against the wall. So then, if there's something for which Felix Steiner should be remembered today, it's for this reason. For having forced with his own actions and tactical choices a mad dictator to face mere reality.